Hello and welcome to Love as a Business Strategy, a podcast that brings humanity to the workplace. We're here to talk about business, but we want to tackle topics that most business leaders shy away from. We believe that humanity and love should be at the center of every successful business. I'm your host, Jeff Ma, and I'm a director at Softway, a business-to-employee solutions company that creates products and offers services that help build resilience and high-performance company cultures. I am joined today with my president and CEO, Mohammed Anwar. Hey, Mo, how's it going?
Hey, Jeff, and hey, everyone.
And Frank Dana, a director at Softway as well, and a good friend. Hey, Frank, how's it going?
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, good to see you, man.
Hey, guys.
Nice hat. So each episode, we like to dive into one element of business or strategy and test our theory of love against it. And today we have an amazing opportunity to speak with Dan Edds. For 25 years, Dan has been a practicing management consultant, working with state and local government, healthcare, K through 12 education, higher education, nonprofits. He is the author of 2 books, the first of which is Transformation Management, and his most recent, Leveraging the Genetics of Leadership, Cracking the Code of Sustainable Team Performance. His latest book demonstrates how elite organizations are revolutionizing the practice of leadership, recreating the world of work, and setting new standards for employee engagement and customer value. Dan, welcome to Love as a Business Strategy. How are you today?
I'm terrific, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with you.
Awesome. If you're not familiar with the show, we do open before we dive right in with some icebreaker questions. And the fun part about this is I never know what they are until this very moment. So let me just crack this digital envelope right now. Frank, it looks like your name is on the top of the list, so you're first.
Me?
Yes, Frank. Would you rather travel the world in a year on a shoestring budget or live in luxury in only one country for a year? It's very interesting.
I would rather travel the world, but live on a shoestring budget
For that year.
for that year. Yeah. Yeah. I'd rather see way more places and enjoy the actual space that I'm in and kind of find the beauty in those areas without having to the creature comforts don't matter as much as the opportunities to learn and grow in those different places. So that's what I would do.
Well, I've traveled with you. And I feel like you'd miss. I feel like you'd miss some things.
Oh no, I definitely would.
Okay.
If we can't stay at the Ritz-Carlton, I don't know what I'm going to do. You know what I'm saying?
Mo, you're up next. Would you rather live without internet or without AC or heat?
I would probably be okay living without AC or heat, but I need internet.
I like the question, but when you really think about it, it's a no-brainer. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know how we would survive without internet, but fair enough. Dan, your question. Are you ready?
Yes.
Would you rather be able to teleport anywhere or be able to read minds?
Oh, teleport anywhere or read minds. I think I would choose the teleport anywhere. Why, I'm not really sure, but I like the idea of being able to go someplace.
Yeah. You could bring Frank some amenities when he's roughing it on his year.
There you go. There you go.
Bring the mini soaps.
Yeah, I mean, I am in a normal year, I'm on an airplane at least 2 or 3 times a month, if not more. And in the last 12 months, I've been on 1 airplane. So I am ready to go someplace, just about any place. Just let me go.
Perfect.
Agreed.
Perfect. So let's jump right in then. And Dan, obviously, I'd just like if you could open up with just tell me a little bit about, or tell everybody a little bit about kind of your background, what you've been doing for those 25 years I mentioned in your intro and how you kind of came to the book. Give us the setup here.
Okay. So 25 years, I've been a practicing management consultant. I've worked with, I don't know, probably a couple hundred different organizations in various capacities. And there was no, one single moment in time, but there were a couple of events that sort of coalesced into an observation, which was basically there's something going on around the whole idea of leadership and the experience of employees where there's a disconnect. Just one real brief story. I had just finished a project for a large state agency. This agency regulated 450,000 healthcare providers. And I was done with the project, and it was very successful. There was light at the end of the tunnel. They were, by any measure, a mess. And I was having my last meeting with the deputy director. I was ready to walk out the door. I had my computer bag in hand. My hand was on the door. Before I walked out the door, it was almost like, we were in church and she was in confession. It was that kind of tone. And she said, I don't even tell my friends where I work anymore. And I turned around and I said, why is that? And she said, it's just too embarrassing. And that was one of those things one of those conversations where I thought there's something going on. And so eventually I began to ask the question, how do elite organizations, high impact organizations that consistently perform at a high level, not for a year or two or three, but for 4, 5, 8, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, how do they approach the practice of leadership? And that got me into a research project and eventually a book that's darn near obsessive and has taken over my life. And I don't sleep very well most nights because I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about it.
Sounds familiar.
Yes.
Muhammad's just like, oh, okay. So there's someone else.
That's normal. That's actually normal. Great. It's good to be validated.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your confirmation.
So, tell us about the book. Tell us about the main kind of theories behind it and what you've learned in it.
Yeah. Well, there was a subset to my question of how do high impact organizations approach leadership, and the sub question was I wondered if there was anything that could be identified as systemic, that there was a system to the way they did leadership. They didn't just tell people go out and lead based on your own personal values or any way you wanted to. I was looking for something that said, okay, is there a system? And of course, then the first thing I had to figure out was, well, what is a system? And then what is a system of leadership? And if I saw one, how would I recognize it? And then that led into, okay, where do I find these organizations and what am I looking for? I eventually avoided, I intentionally avoided technology firms and public organizations, because there's just too many other things going on there that would impact the employee engagement and the employee experience. So I really centered on healthcare because the data on those organizations is public and it's quite abundant. Ended up that led me to other organizations in manufacturing, healthcare, other healthcare, education. I had amazing conversations with 2 senior officers of the United States Army. And when I knew what I was looking for, I began to see evidence of a system every place I looked. High impact organizations approach leadership very much like they were designing a system, and they start out with the purpose. And you guys know in technology, if you're designing some kind of a technology system, you have to first figure out, well, what's it going to do? What's the purpose behind it? What's the output? And another quick story, a hospital CEO had asked me to come in and help him. He said, I want to design a model for doing leadership. And so when I met with him, we talked about it. And I said, Eric, it's great. I'd be happy to help you. But fundamentally, I believe that leadership is more about a system than a collection of individuals. And the first thing we're going to need to know is, what do you want the system to produce? And he looked at me and he said, that's exactly what I want to do. And no exaggeration, I walked out the door and I'm thinking to myself, now, how in the heck am I going to do this? But it turned out to be hands down the most profound, the most impactful engagement in 25 years of consulting.
Can you, Dan, sorry.
You're good. No, Mohammed, take it.
For the audience purposes and for my knowledge, what is your definition of a system? Just so that we're aligned to it.
Yeah. Okay. That's a perfect question, and there are several definitions, but one of the more common ones actually comes out of the book written by Donella Meadows, "Thinking in Systems: A Primer," where she defines a system as a system will take a handful of key elements, organize them in a specific way to produce a purpose. Other people have built on that definition to say a designed or intentional purpose. There are other definitions out there, but many of them have those same basic elements. A core set of resources or elements that interact in a very specific and defined ways that they produce a common purpose or output.
Okay, so and could you give examples of resources inside of that system that could be considered resources?
Sure. So that took me quite a while to figure out. But organizationally, every organization, your organization, my organization, it doesn't matter if it's the United States Army with 2 million active and reserve duty personnel, or a school, an elementary school with 75 leaders. Every organization is comprised of people, money, using that term in the broadest sense to include plant and equipment. It's basically everything that money can buy, and specialized knowledge. You guys are in business because of your specialized knowledge. I'm in business because of my specialized knowledge. So what I discovered is that high impact organization, and this is probably one of the biggest takeaways from the research, is that average organization understands those resources as assets that need to be managed, which is a nice way of saying controlled.
Right.
High impact organization sees those as resources that can be developed for ever increasing value. So example, how do we look at people in our organizations? Are they an asset?
Right.
We talk about people being our most important asset. Well, that word asset sort of means and suggests something. However, if we say they are a resource, well, we can develop resources to increase more and more value for our customers. And so what I found was that organizations that have that perspective, they are more inclined to see people as a complete resource. In other words, they are not just about developing, professional skills and technical skills, but they see value in developing the whole person. One of the case studies is a large hospital of like almost 10,000 employees, and they see people as a resource, and they intentionally, underscore that word, intentionally go about developing not just better doctors and nurses and med techs, et cetera, but they actually go about developing a more self-confident workforce, because they've figured out that if they have a workforce that's self-confident and feel empowered personally, they're more inclined to speak up when they see an error or a potential error. They're more inclined to give their opinion, their observation, and how to improve a system or a process. And oh, by the way, they happen to be, for the last 8 or 9 years, ranked as one of the safest hospitals in America. Some have suggested one of the safest hospitals in the world. And that may not sound too much to you and I until we realize that accidental and avoidable deaths in hospitals is one of the leading causes of death in America.
Yep. we believe that maybe COVID has changed those numbers, but even before pre-COVID, the deaths at a hospital, avoidable deaths, were almost like a Boeing 747 crashing every day.
Mhm.
That's the number of deaths that could have been avoided at a hospital system.
Yeah.
Wow.
I last week I was actually talking to a hospital CEO, and just just for confirmation, I asked him about that, and he said, unfortunately, that is the reality.
Yeah. So it sounds a lot like what you're talking about kind of building these systems and talking about self-confidence and empowerment and helping people. I mean, you're talking about actually saving lives. Like when
Mhm.
people feel more confident in themselves and their team members, and they feel like they can bring their full selves to work. And we approach that like when we're translating it for our audiences as developing and being focused on developing culture, right? Being very intentional about the culture you're producing inside of your organization.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, how do these organizations rally leaders around this purpose? Right?
Mhm.
How do they bring leaders from a variety of different perspectives, from lived experiences that they've had elsewhere, from other organizations they've worked for? How do they bring them in and create a sustained purpose that people begin to emulate?
Right. Yeah. Great question. And what I saw is how do organizations do that, and then they sustain it for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years.
Right.
And that's where the idea of a system comes in. So if you read the literature on leadership and a lot of literature on culture, what you read is about how follow this leadership guru or these principles or these laws, and you will be a leader others want to follow. Or it's about personal fulfillment. Be the best you can be. As soon as we start talking about a system, though, now we have to start thinking about not being the best you can be and being the best I can be, but being the best we can be. So one of my question marks when I began to see this was, does this idea of a system and a systematic way of approaching leadership, does it make a difference if it's a small organization or a large organization? So Frank, to answer your question, I'll tell you this. Actually, I'll merge two little stories into one.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm having a conversation with a guy by the name of General Barry McCaffrey. You still see him on the news every once in a while. He's a paid analyst for issues of national security. General McCaffrey, when he retired after 32 years, was one of the most highly decorated generals to have ever worn the uniform. During the first Gulf War, he was the commander of the 24th Infantry Mechanized Division. For us non-military types, he had a workforce of 26,000 soldiers under his command.
Wow.
And when he retired, he went on to serve in the Clinton administration as a cabinet officer. And I asked him, I said, how does the Army approach the subject and the practice of leadership? And he immediately said, we practice servant leadership. And that was not a surprise. But then he began talking to me about love and about serving under, in this particular case, General Norman Schwarzkopf in the first Gulf War. And he said, General McCaffrey said to me, quote, he actually loved me, end quote.
Wow. There we go.
And to be honest, I didn't hear him say that in our conversation because I was so focused on him and not wanting to make a total fool of myself. But when I was reading the transcript, I saw that and I thought, he actually said that. And put it in a context. Here you have a guy, he holds 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat in Vietnam. Schwarzkopf held at least 1 Purple Heart for wounds received in combat. They both men have led men into combat. They've seen the requirements of leadership in the most extreme cases. And here's a general openly talking to me about love and about the role of love in the United States Army. I was frankly blown away. So combine that with another story. I'm sitting in an office of an elementary school principal. She's a principal of 450 elementary school children. This school in 5 years went from the lowest performing school to the highest performing school in a district of 25,000 students and 18 different elementary schools. When I asked her about her approach to leadership, she initially said, leadership? I don't know anything about leadership. And then I said, well, if there was one or two words that you might use to describe leadership, what would they be? And she said, well, this won't be very popular, but love and grace. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's nice. You know, she's got 450 school kids that are streaming into
Have
the
fun.
Yeah, and you know, and the front door is right behind her office, and they're streaming into the school because it's early in the morning. And you know, I'm thinking, well, how nice. You know, these kids have a principal who loves them. And she read my mind. She said, "That's not how I'm thinking. That's not how I'm using these words." She said, "I use these words because I know they challenge me that I can have a difficult conversation, but do it in a spirit of love and grace." She said, it means that I can push my people and hold them accountable and hold myself accountable, but do it in a spirit of love and grace. And then the next breath, she's talking to me about collaboration as the path to academic achievement with her students. And it was kind of, I saw the connection between what she was saying and what General McCaffrey had said. And so when I walked out the door, I said, oh, by the way, don't be too embarrassed about these concepts of love and concepts of love and grace. I said, I had a prior conversation, a full colonel of the United States Army, member of the U.S. Special Forces, U.S. Army Ranger, tell me almost exactly the same words, and a 4-star general, certified war hero, holder of multiple Purple Hearts, tell me almost exactly the same thing. So, Frank, long-winded story, but this is how they do it. They don't rally anybody. They don't use inspiration. They don't use, you know, rhetoric that's just, you know, sort of inspires us.
Yep.
You know, that's good for a while, but after a while it gets weary. And what I found was that every one of these high impact organizations start with, what's the experience of the workforce that we want our employees to experience? What do we want our employees to experience on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Has nothing to do with inspirational rhetoric and motivation. It's what do we want them to experience? Because it's that experience that will keep them and get them engaged and keep them engaged and keep them around. So that's the starting point. From there, every one of them they did it in different ways, but they all said in one way, shape, or form, okay, if we want our workforce to experience what it means to be empowered, what kind of behaviors do our leaders need to model every day so that our employees can experience empowerment or team or love and grace or collaboration or respect or relationship. And in fact, what I found was that these high impact organizations put more value and emphasis on behaviors than they do core values.
Very cool.
There's a whole lot more behind it, but that's the essence.
You should take your headphone mic off and just drop it on the ground. Essentially, but please don't do that. I don't want it to break the headset equipment.
So
but
Dan, there's this
man.
Oh, sorry. That was awesome.
I'm just responding. I'm actually reacting. That was great. What exactly?
Settle down, Frank. Settle down.
So Dan, there's this saying that we've come up with at Softway, where we're talking about culture. And, you must have heard of Peter Drucker's saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Right.
And we say that behaviors eat culture for lunch because it starts with behavior. You cannot build a culture that you want to aspire, whether that's culture of high reliability or like for hospital systems or any of those things, without the right behaviors that are embodied by the leaders and every single individual. And it's the leader who sets the tone for those behaviors that everyone follows or embodies and witnesses and starts practice on their own.
Yeah.
But
so the question, Mohammed, and I love that observation. So the question I would put back to you, I'm happy to answer the question if you want me to.
Sure. I want Mohammed to answer the question. I don't even know what the question is.
So take that, and what do you do? How do you embed that idea that leaders must model behaviors to 2 million active and reserve duty personnel in the United States Army or an elementary school with 75 educational leaders?
It starts with servant leadership. And servant leadership, in the simplest terms, is you put the needs of others before yourself. And when you are able to be selfless and come from the angle of you're here to serve others, not lead, but serve, then that care, compassion, love, endearment for your team, for your coworkers, makes you behave in ways that give them that experience.
Right.
And so that's how a leader must start. But if a leader is in a position of leadership for the wrong reasons, which is power, authority, selfish gain, and those kind of satisfying factors that some leaders may have, and they're in a position of leadership, but maybe not are truly leaders themselves, that's when you see the wrong type of behaviors of control, micromanagement, lack of empowerment,
fear,
and so forth. And so what you're describing to me is a high impact organization. You've taken it to the extreme, right? You talked about military, you talked about hospital systems. If you think about it, these are all high reliability based organizations. For them, reliability comes down to the lives of people, whether that's in the military or the hospital system.
Great observation.
And so your high impact organization is that it's that much of emphasis is that it involves the life of people. And so what I'm gathering from your research, where you seem to have focused on those high reliability organizations, is that when leaders are embodying the behaviors of a servant leader, where they put the needs of others before themselves and create that environment of love and endearment, those organizations have seen an uptick in safety and reduce the loss of life or accidents and empowerment and so forth. So is that correct?
Yeah, there's more to it though. So you asked me originally, what is my, what definition of a system am I looking at, or am I using? So, I said, a system takes a handful of key elements or resources and organizes them in a very specific way to produce an output or a purpose. So what I found was that there's three resources organize themselves through three things. We've mentioned one, which is behaviors. The other one is rules, and the other one is routines. So how does this work? So I actually asked the General McCaffrey, I said, how does the United States Army reinforce the servant leadership among its officers? And he gave me 3 ways. I'll give you one. He said, when a helicopter, when a team is going off on a mission and they're boarding the helicopter, he said, by rule, not by suggestion, but by rule, the highest ranking officer gets on that helicopter last. It's largely symbolic, but it's reinforcing the whole idea. The highest ranking officer makes sure that his team is in the safety of that helicopter before him or her. And then there's the counterpart to that. By rule, the highest ranking officer is the first to get off that helicopter because they're putting themselves in harm's way first. Now, Army guys have told me, well, there's some logistical reasons for that. I said, yes, but that's how the Army trains its leaders. It's not a suggestion. Simon Sinek wrote a book, a terrific book, a few years ago called Leaders Eat Last. And it's a great book. I thought it was one of the best books on leadership around until my own, maybe.
Confirmed.
Yes. But, he makes the point that in the United States Marine Corps, the rule is leaders eat last. They make sure that, the highest ranking officer goes through the cafeteria chow line last. What I think he does not mention, I've read the book a couple of times, so I think I've got it correctly. He describes it as a suggestion that leaders eat last. In the Marine Corps, it is not a suggestion, it is a rule. And as soon as we start defining rules and routines and behaviors that will take these, handful of resources, produce a specific purpose, now we're in the business of talking about a system. A system that is defined, that's measurable, that's articulated, and oh, by the way, you can improve the system if it's not performing the way you want it to.
So I have a question to ask. When you think about it, these systems are still defined by a person, by a human. So I wonder if these systems can truly be instituted if the leaders who still have to make decisions around these systems are not embodying the right behaviors or mindsets. Yeah. So I suspect that it's not that simple to just take a system and institute it. It has to go through first the leader, regardless of, they have to embody those behaviors and mindsets in order for the system to be successful. Because if we put in these systems and the leaders at the top are not embodying the right behaviors and mindsets, you may not even get that system. So we still have to start with the people aspect.
Perfect observation. And I'm not suggesting at all that there is not a place for high quality leadership. In fact, what my observation and others as well is that the right system can take a pretty average leader and turn him into a rock star. And that actually is the history of the United States military. And Mohammed, you're absolutely right. You could design and install a terrific system of leadership or any other kind of system. But if leadership, the individuals, if they are not modeling those behaviors, take the system, throw it out the window because it's useless. So just to show you how one organization that I looked at, how they approach that. It's a healthcare organization. Actually, I just mentioned it's one of the safest hospitals in America. When I was taking a tour and one of their senior leaders spent a whole morning with me, she took me to a hallway where every Tuesday morning at exactly 7 a.m., the executive leaders of this organization gather, and it's essentially a value stream map where they're tracking strategic objectives, where they want to go, and it's all very well designed. They do it for specific amount of minutes every Tuesday morning. Don't be late. They never sit down. They stand up. But at the end of this hallway, my tour guide pointed this, poster out to me, and there was 8 or 10 what she referred to as foundational behaviors. This is a hospital system, like I said, of almost 10,000 people. And everything is driven off of a value of respect. Well, they've identified these core foundational behaviors. They had them posted on a wall. And then she pointed out to me that there were various initials that had been, written on this poster and it's laminated. And, I looked at it, you could see, people's initials. She said, those are the initials of our senior leaders who have said, this behavior is a weakness of mine and I want to improve this specific behavior. And here's my initial to tell the world, this is what I'm working on this year.
I hope that they'll work on more than once a year, but
well.
So, but no, that's very good. Like one of the things that we strive to practice is vulnerability. And one things that we have recognized is good leadership comes from leaders who are willing to be vulnerable. And by vulnerable, we're not talking about sharing your deepest, darkest secrets,
right,
but by taking ownership and apologizing or understanding your shortcomings and being willing to share that with others that, hey, I'm not perfect. I messed up. And I want to take ownership of that. That's on me. And that is probably one of the hardest things for accomplished leaders to do, is being able to come in and say, this is my weakness.
Yep.
So the fact that you said that safest hospital has this practice of doing is really like hitting home with where we strive to talk about the culture of love and the right behaviors practiced by the leaders.
Right. Frank, you were starting to say something, but I think you may have been on mute.
I was. My kids are dancing, and the other rooms around the house, they're playing over there. So I'm trying to balance that. No, I was just gonna kind of echo what Muhammad said, that it's a good starting point, and creating visibility around areas that you want to improve on, I think, is a valuable thing, because there's accountability there for the employees, right? And also the patrons of the hospital system. But I'm wondering about employees and how this type of leadership helps employees feel that empowerment, and what you've seen in these types of organizations, where how will leaders work with their employees to continue to prove out through these behaviors, rules, and routines the values that they're espousing? Yeah,
great question. So again, I'll use a couple examples from the book. So this healthcare organization I just referenced, they train their leaders very, very specifically to lead in very specific ways. So standard, off the shelf, definition of a great leader is someone who is a great problem solver. Almost every book you read on leadership, here's a great leader, they're a terrific problem solver. This hospital actually says, no, we do not want our leaders to be problem solvers, because it violates the value of respect. So if I'm working for Jeff and he's the manager of a clinic, and I'm, a doctor, or nurse, or med tech, or whatever, and I'm having a problem, if I come to Jeff and say, I'm having a problem, that's actually code for two issues that Jeff was going to have to deal with. Number one, the routine is that I don't go to Jeff. If I'm coming to Jeff, it's symbolic of the fact that Jeff is not leading the way he's been trained to lead, because he's supposed to be coming to me. He's supposed to be coming through my workstation on a regular basis to see how I am doing, to see if I have everything I need, to see if there's anything on my plate today that's going to stop me, hinder me, or slow me down from doing my work. So that would be the number one problem, is that Jeff's supposed to be coming to me. Second of all, if I do bring a problem to Jeff, his job is to help me think through the problem, think about the scope of the problem, to maybe talk with me, help me understand, work with me to understand other people who may be impacted by that problem and various solutions, but his job is not to solve the problem for me, because that's disrespectful to my basic underlying intelligence, my ability as a human being to think creatively and do problem solving.
Mm.
So he is trained not to solve my problem.
It's interesting. I mean, the way we approach that, and the thinking that we utilize in Softway is we view that as sympathetic leadership, where someone is coming in and solving a problem for someone, which ultimately ends up stunting the growth and the development and the opportunities for that person, right?
Yep.
And so when you think about sympathy, typically you're thinking about that in, I have the best the person's best interest at heart, but in reality, you're actually causing a disservice. A disrespect is a great way to think about it, because you brought them in to solve problems, and now you're going ahead of them, trying to do it for them in the name of being sympathetic, instead of empowering them and being empathetic to their situation by providing those solutions alongside of them. So that's a great answer.
Yeah. Well, again, I'll go back to my conversation with General McCaffrey, because I asked him about that specific idea of who solves the problems. And he said, by rule, that's the word he used, by rule, the highest ranking officer on a mission, the highest ranking officer who is closest to the battle, he makes the decision of how to approach that battle. And he said, I have been in the White House Situation Room many times where we are watching a military mission in real time as it's happening through the magic of satellite communications. He said, we have virtually the exact same information as that officer that's on the ground. But he said, if you really want to screw up the Army, and his language got very colorful, he said, if you really want to screw up a mission, take that authority or that power away from that officer that's on the ground in the middle of that battle and bring it back to the White House.
Wow. Yeah.
So I have some observations and maybe some input I'd love to seek from you from a healthcare standpoint. So in healthcare organizations, administrative leadership traditionally is not led by clinician background people. Is that correct? Like I believe from my research, I've understood that the administrative leadership, even up to the C-suite, they may not have come from the ranks of clinicians.
Yeah,
in the military, I see they come from, they grow from their ranks from the field. Right. So the question I have is, if you have leadership in place in administration that don't have a clinician background, but yet are leading strategic decisions for the direction of a hospital system and how they should be growing or adapting or moving forward, and the clinicians who are the frontline workers in a hospital system don't have a seat at the table, or our voices are not even heard, how do we make sure that those organizations are high impact, high performing? Because I see that as a problem.
Yeah. Well, you're not the only one. I'm really not an expert in this, but I know that there's been a lot of research that's been done of, who makes the better hospital CEO, the clinician or the peer administrator? And I don't know that there's a hard answer to that, but I do know that there's a lot of work going on right now in the industry to merge the clinician with the peer administrator. And it's really a result of how the industry has evolved, where, back in the day, when I was, young, you went to the local neighborhood doctor to get your annual physical, or to get your arm stitched up or your head stitched up when you fell off your bike. And everybody knew the doctor because he was sort of a neighbor. I mean, he was the little one person office, and they had a receptionist. Well, today all those little offices have been bought out by larger organizations. And the tendency is to tell the doctor, well, you just focus on being a doctor and we'll take care of everything else. And the doctors are now, or the clinicians now, are beginning to kick back against that and saying, hey, wait a minute, we need a chair at the table. And there's actually processes in place and shared governance models that are in place that's actually bringing them to the table.
Got it. So talking about that, so if there is a trend for clinicians merging with the administrative role, but they've been educated and their lifetime training is on being a clinician and not have a lot of leadership or business or management training in their career, even in their continued education, for that matter of fact, how are organizations going to fill that void if they are trying to get clinicians to take on more administrative responsibilities?
Yeah. Well, I think the simple answer to that, and maybe it's just because I wrote the book, is when you've designed a system, you can train people to the requirements of the system. So this particular hospital that I'm referencing, they have an extraordinarily well-designed system that just happens to come from the Toyota, from the Toyota Motor Corporation. 2001, 2002, they were the first healthcare system to adopt the Toyota production system, i.e. lean, and they are now the world's leader in the education and implementation of lean in healthcare. They train hospitals all over the world in how to apply lean. But what they don't talk about too much, and actually one of their key executives wrote an endorsement for the book, and she said, in fact, she defines leadership as a system separate from a charismatic personality that can be measured, monitored, improved. So when you take a person and place them into a system, you can teach them the requirements of the system. And then their natural leadership ability, whether it be terrific or average, really can grow and multiply and have a tremendous impact. So this hospital that I've been referencing, their CEO, he's now, I think, in his 22nd, 3rd, 4th year as the CEO.
Wow.
When they formally, and he's an MD, he's still a practicing doctor. He actually did his residency at this hospital, so he's been with them a really long time.
Wow.
And he was named as the CEO based on a democratic vote of the whole system, all of the doctors. And one of the first things he did was, in working with the board, he said, this democratic idea of being the CEO has got to change. And so they appointed Dr. Kaplan as the CEO, and he royally made most of his colleagues really angry. And but they took seriously the imperative of improving safety in not only their hospital but also lowering cost. And so they went radical. At the time, it was a radical decision to adopt lean and the Toyota production system. But with that system came a management system, which they define as a leadership system that shows every leader, whether they be a clinician or a peer administrator, how to lead, how to engage with their staff. And so it's the system that drives the performance of the individual leader.
So I wanna challenge a little bit with the systems that we're referring to. I believe that COVID may have exposed some gaps in those systems, because while the systems are filled with rules and routines, as soon as the pandemic hit, these hospital systems were dealing with things that they'd never encountered before. And so at times, these systems and routines that are filled with rules can't immediately adapt or adjust to such radical change that we may be facing. And so in those cases, how do these systems that are set on these rigorous rules and routines, how can a leadership or management team quickly adapt to this? Because we saw a lot of hospital systems crumble when it came to COVID.
Yep. Well, I think it's a great question. And invariably, when I first started talking to people I knew and my friends about, I'm doing this research as leadership as a system, invariably their first reaction was, well, is that a good idea? And some would say, because every leader has their own personal style, and is it a good idea to be telling people how to lead? And it was a good question, and at the time I didn't have an answer for it. But what I observed, actually, that the simple answer is a plant right outside my backyard. So this plant normally has long and narrow leaves, but because I don't know anything about gardening, I put it in a place of shade. Well, today, if you look at that plant, it has long and wide leaves because it's learned to adapt to my air and being a dummy when it comes to gardening, because it wider leaves lets it, absorb the sunlight. So think about an organization, healthcare organization, 10,000 employees. By definition, they probably have somewhere between 900 and 1,000 leaders, somebody with some kind of leadership management ability. If everybody is leading based on their own personal profile, their own values, how easy is it to make a shift in something like COVID when it comes along, when everybody is leading based on their own kind of value system, or where there's a common way of leading, and then, we need to be doing this other thing as well. And our value system respects people, and we train people, we develop people to speak up when they see an issue. That's actually one of their words, speak up. It's one of their core foundational behaviors. We want people to speak up when they see an issue. So you've got this culture where people are not only free, but they're empowered to speak up. So they see an issue. We need to make sure. I actually had this conversation with one of their doctors Tuesday, exact same conversation. They are empowered to speak up. So one of the doctor I was talking to, he was quite proud of the fact that in their determination of who is going to get the COVID virus, the vaccine, they are not going to make any distinction based on income, social status, equality, race, ethnics, whatever. In fact, he said, we have 250,000 people on the waiting list right now. He said, the computer system that we're going to use is going to randomly select those people, so we can't make any distinction between who they are. Now, compare that to another hospital that is virtually right next door. Last week, there was a huge issue. They, for some reason, thought it would be smart to put out an email to 500 of their biggest donors that said, by the way, because you're one of our donors, we're going to put you in the front of the line, and we have a vaccine shot with your name on it. So that immediately hit the news, lots of embarrassment, et cetera. And someone finally said, I guess that wasn't very smart, and we really didn't mean to send out that email. So, when you've got a system that says we value people, we value behaviors, we value ethics, we want people to speak up. My observation, it's a lot easier to change that kind of redirect that kind of an organization as to opposed to an organization where everybody is leading based on their own idea of what's appropriate.
Yeah. So even in the organizations where there is like that unified structure, but say the pressures of the realities around reimbursements to hospital systems, they're shrinking. And the administrative leadership is having to make decisions saying, patient to nurse ratio has to be reduced. And we cannot have, 1 nurse to 6 patients. We need to have 1:8 patients so that we can manage our budgets, manage our funding. And at that moment in time, the nurses and the clinicians know that that's detrimental to the safety of the patient experience and the patient safety, but yet they're forced to comply, even if they're able to speak up. Or if they are in a situation where PPE equipment is told to them in COVID, you can reuse it for a week and go treat patients when they've been trained all their life saying that you have to change your PPE equipment. And here in COVID times, we're saying you can reuse it. And they're being forced to do these things. And it is against their training. It is against their morality. How do just systems and rules, because that's really what they're doing. They're following the rules. And the rules are saying you should do this, whether you like it or not. So how do we make sure we manage the morality of these clinicians to the business needs or the rules that are being governed and set at the top?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. One is who's making the rules. That actually is more important than the rules themselves, is who's making them. So if the rule is coming out of a government agency, that's one thing. But if the rule is designed to support and enforce a culture of respect, now we're down to the level of what's our relationship with our staff and our employees, and how do we develop them? So I'm sort of on the tangent of this one healthcare organization. So if you want me to move on to another one?
No, I'm actually enjoying the healthcare example.
Okay. Yes, good.
Okay. Okay. So this particular organization, and let's be frank, every organization has rules, and most of them are nonsense. Every organization has the written ones, and those we all need, but then the really important ones are the non-written rules. So this organization, because they put a value on their people as a resource that can be developed both personally and professionally. I could be wrong, but they don't put a lot of emphasis on like ratios. What they do is they put emphasis on the process. And I asked the question to my host during this tour. I said, what happens when someone comes along and says, well, we need more staff for this particular clinic? And she said, well, the first thing we do is we ask them, okay, what kind of process improvement or lean initiatives have you done recently? And if they say, well, I haven't done any recently, they'll say, okay, by rule, you are a leader in this organization, and your job by rule is to conduct 1 to 3, personally conduct 1 to 3 process improvement or lean initiatives every year. Have you done one? Well, no, I haven't done. Okay, well, that's the first problem. The second problem is they don't spend a lot of time talking about budgets. What they spend a lot of time talking about is things like what percentage of time are the nurses spending with patients? So in 2001, 2002, when they started this journey with lean, nurses were spending about 35% of their time actually with patients. Today, they're up around 90 or 95% of their time. And so by getting that kind of productivity and focusing on value-added processes and everything that will extract waste out of their system, they actually end up putting more value back in for their patients. So during the recession of 2008, 2009, most hospitals in the country, if not the world, was laying off people right and left. This hospital didn't lay off anybody. In fact, they continued to pay bonuses to the people who qualified for bonuses. And then, as they do today, they still have some of the strongest financials in the industry.
Nice.
And they don't do it by fussing around with budgets. I've done a lot of work. Most of my consulting work, I spend a lot of time with finance directors, and they're all about budgets. And a good leader, a good manager, or someone who, is really good at controlling the budget. And sometimes I just want to scream because they're putting the emphasis on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
They need to be focusing on what value are we providing our customers, and working with developing their financial resources like it was a resource that can be developed for value.
It sounds to like the thing that I've been thinking a lot about as you've been talking, and I think this interesting kind of segue into this unique experience that you've seen in this healthcare. It's definitely not the norm, right? There's definitely going to be organizations out there that are unfortunately weaponizing the rules in order to get people where they need to go without being flexible. But the question you asked a little while ago, and somehow we've already been speaking for an hour, which is insane, but it's also wonderful. The question you asked is, what do we want our employees to experience? And I think that's such a unique takeaway from this conversation. Like, that one question is such a unique, like, a thing to think about, regardless of industry. Is, as a leader, you should be thinking about that question of what do we want our employees to experience, and then creating a culture around the employee experience, because the output of that employee experience is better productivity. It's a better end product, whether that's patient care or a better piece of technology or widget or whatever it is. And so that to me was a very special question that I'm going to continue to think about on a daily basis.
Great. I'll get off the healthcare kick for a moment. So there is a Ford dealership in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I don't know where they're at right now with this number, but for the last several years, they have been ranked as either the number one Ford dealership in the world to work for, or they've been right at it.
Wow.
Out of 5,000 Ford dealerships, they are the number one Ford dealership to work for. And if they're not number one, they're like right behind number one. Their customer satisfaction scores far outsurpassed, the traditional Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Mercedes-Benz, et cetera. And they're a Ford dealership. But they make that workforce experience strategic, and they measure it every year. And they have built that experience of the workforce right into their strategy. In fact, it's a central component of their business strategy, is that engagement and experience of their workforce. And I think out of the last 25 years, I may get this not exactly right, but like the last 25 or 26 years, they have been given the Ford's President's Award like 21 years, which is the highest award that Ford gives out to their dealerships. They lack nothing in profitability. They lack nothing in car sales. And oh, by the way, they are closed on Sundays because they want their employees to be with their family on Sundays rather than in the car dealership selling cars.
Something I learned very recently from one of my mentors and advisors is that there's a difference between employee satisfaction and employee engagement.
Right.
And employee satisfaction is benefited from the policies and the rules. Right. And if those are set up really well, then the employee can have satisfaction, whether that's pay scales, processes, rules and stuff. Engagement, on the other hand, is experienced from their immediate boss and their supervisor. But if you don't have employee satisfaction, it doesn't matter how good your boss is, you will not have the engagement. And so that, I think, is making a case for what you just brought up, this whole topic about systems as a system, leadership as a system to get the highest impact out of your organization and your teams. And I can see now the importance of making sure that the employee satisfaction is set through their system, and then the engagement is to the people-to-people interaction. But without the proper system, you can't experience engagement, no matter how good your immediate boss is.
Right. Yeah, I think you probably can on a very small scale. I mean, if the four of us, were working together, we could sort of, have a high degree of engagement. But as soon as we go up to 400 or 4,000 or 40,000 or 4 million, now you need some kind of a system that's going to coach, teach, train every leader and how to do it.
Very cool.
Yeah. Well, time has surely flied, and I want to thank by really showing some appreciation here for Dan. Dan, thank you for joining us and sharing about your book and your experiences and your wisdom. Thank you so much for that time.
Honored.
Thank
Mohammed
you.
Frank, thank you as always for joining in this conversation. It was a great one. When we hear about, I love the dichotomy of kind of our conversation here. When you hear the term system, you kind of have this like thought of rigid, unmoving, kind of cold elements. And I love that contrast and opening it up and seeing as how there's room for the warmth of love within systems and around systems, and building systems in and out of love. So this was a great eye-opening conversation for all of us. It was a wonderful conversation. So thank you again, Dan. And for the audience here at Love as a Business Strategy, we are posting new episodes every Tuesday. And if you enjoyed what you heard, we'd love for you to give us that feedback, leave a review, subscribe. You can see us at softway.com/labs, LAABS. And please tell us what you'd like to hear about next and share it with a friend. So with that, I will see you guys next week, and we'll talk soon.